If you pass through the old towns along the Missouri border, you'll hear stories about men who made fatal mistakes, stories about words spoken in the wrong saloon, insults thrown at the wrong stranger, whiskey spilled on the wrong coat. The old-timers will lean close, voices dropping low, and tell you, never disrespect a quiet man in a hat pulled low. Might be you're talking to the devil himself. Autumn 1864. And the Missouri-Kansas border had been bleeding for so long that folks forgot what peace looked like. The war between the states was 3 years deep, but on the border it felt like 30. Every town from Independence to Lexington existed in that space between life and death, where you woke up not knowing if you'd see sunset, where every rider coming down the road could be your last sight on earth. The Jayhawkers from Kansas had burned so many Missouri farmsteads that the horizon always carried a haze of smoke, thick and bitter. You could taste it in the back of your throat, smell it in your clothes, feel it in your lungs. Union garrisons occupied the key towns, blue uniforms standing guard at checkpoints, rifles loaded and ready, but they controlled nothing past their walls. The countryside belonged to the bushwhackers, those Confederate guerrillas who moved like ghosts through the woods and struck like lightning from the shadows. And of all the bushwhackers riding through Missouri in 1864, one name made even hardened Union soldiers check over their shoulders: Bloody Bill Anderson. Bill wasn't tall, wasn't particularly broad-shouldered, didn't have the look of a killer at first glance, but his eyes, Lord, his eyes were something else, dark and cold as a December creek, holding a rage that burned so deep it had frozen solid, since the day his sisters Josephine and Mary died in that Kansas City prison collapse, crushed under falling bricks while Union authorities stood by and did nothing. Bill Anderson had become something more than a soldier. He'd become vengeance itself, riding through Missouri with scalps tied to his saddle and a thirst for Union blood that nothing could quench. He rode with a band of guerrillas that included some of the deadliest men the border war ever produced. There was Archie Clement, Little Archie they called him, though there wasn't nothing little about his capacity for violence. He was Bill's shadow and executioner, the one who'd pull the trigger without blinking. Frank and Jesse James rode with them too, the brothers who'd carry Bill's lessons into the outlaw years that followed the war. Jesse was young still, learning the trade, watching his mentor's every move. Frank was the thinker, the one who planned while Bill acted. Jim Anderson, Bill's own brother, shared the family hunger for revenge. And Dave Poole, silent as a grave, who killed without hesitation or emotion. Listen here, this story gets darker from here. Hit that like button and subscribe if you ain't already, because what's coming next is damn brutal, friend. You won't believe what happens when a Union soldier makes the worst mistake of his short life. The town was small, nameless in most histories, one of those Missouri settlements that existed only because the railroad passed through. Union forces occupied it. A garrison of maybe 30 soldiers under Lieutenant Samuel Cross, a man whose cruelty had earned him a reputation even among his own troops. Cross had a taste for power and no conscience to temper it. He hanged rebel sympathizers without trial, burned farms on suspicion alone, and encouraged his men to abuse Confederate civilians however they saw fit. In the 2 months Cross had commanded that garrison, he'd executed 12 people. 12, including a 14-year-old boy accused of passing messages to bushwhackers. The townspeople hated Cross, feared him more, and kept their mouths shut because speaking up meant a rope around your neck. But Cross had gotten comfortable, confident. He believed his garrison walls and Union authority made him untouchable, believed the bushwhackers were cowards who wouldn't dare enter Union-controlled territory. He said it publicly, loudly, in the saloon where his men drank. Bushwhackers are cowards hiding in the woods. They wouldn't dare face us man to man. Cross didn't know Bloody Bill Anderson was about to prove him wrong. It was a Tuesday evening, the sun falling like molten copper over the dusty main street, when Bill rode into that town with 2 of his men. They wore Confederate regular uniforms, not guerrilla gear, trying to blend in, gather intelligence on a Union supply convoy carrying weapons. Bill needed information, not confrontation, not yet. The saloon smelled like stale beer and tobacco smoke, the kind of place where men came to forget the war for a few hours. Bill sat alone at a corner table, hat pulled low over his face, trying to stay invisible. His 2 men were at the bar, nursing drinks, listening to Union soldiers brag about skirmishes and raids. The locals knew who Bill was the moment he walked in. You could see it in their faces, that flash of recognition, that careful, neutral expression that said, "I ain't seen nothing, I don't know nothing." But the Union soldiers didn't know. To them, Bill was just another dirty rebel, one more piece of Confederate trash cluttering up their town. Private James McAllister stumbled through the saloon door around 8 o'clock, drunk as a lord and twice as loud. He was young, couldn't have been more than 20, fresh from Ohio and celebrating a promotion. His uniform was new, his boots barely broken in, his face still soft with the kind of innocence that don't last long in a war. McAllister was laughing, shouting something about being made corporal, when he bumped hard into Bill's table. The impact sent Bill's whiskey glass flying, amber liquid splashing across Bill's coat and lap, soaking into the dark fabric. The entire saloon went silent. McAllister looked down at Bill and laughed. Actually laughed. "Watch where you're sitting, Reb," he slurred, words running together. Then he shoved Bill's shoulder, hard enough to rock him in his chair. Dirty rebel trash taking up space. Bill sat perfectly still. The whiskey dripped from his coat onto the wooden floor, each drop loud in the sudden quiet. He slowly raised his head, and for the first time McAllister saw Bill's eyes, those cold, dark eyes that had watched Union soldiers die, that had looked at Jayhawkers begging for mercy and found none to give. "You know who I am, boy?" Bill asked quietly. His voice was soft, conversational almost, but it carried a weight that made the locals step back from the bar. McAllister was too drunk to read the room, too young to understand the danger he was in. He laughed again, leaning down close to Bill's face. "Don't care who you are, Reb. You're all the same. Cowards hiding in the woods, too scared to fight like real soldiers." Bill stood slowly, wiping the whiskey from his coat with careful, deliberate movements. He was shorter than McAllister, less imposing physically, but something about the way he moved made the young soldier take an unconscious step back. "Cowards," Bill repeated as if tasting the word. Then he looked past McAllister to the Union soldiers at the bar. They were watching now, hands drifting toward their sidearms, sensing something was wrong but not sure what. Bill's two guerrillas had already moved toward the door, hands on their weapons, waiting for Bill's signal, but Bill just smiled. A cold, terrible smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You best hope you never learn different, boy," Bill said softly. Then he walked out of the saloon, his men following, leaving McAllister standing there confused, and the locals knowing they'd just witnessed the first act of something that would end in blood. Outside, in the cool evening air that smelled of horses and dust, Bill stood in the street looking back at the saloon. His coat was still damp with whiskey, the insult still ringing in his ears. "We leaving?" one of his men asked. Bill didn't answer right away. He just stood there watching the lamplight spill from the saloon windows, listening to McAllister's drunken laughter echoing into the night. "No," Bill finally said, his voice quiet as a prayer and cold as a grave. "We ain't leaving. Not yet." Bill and his men rode out to their camp 3 miles into the woods, where the rest of the guerrilla band waited in a hollow surrounded by oak trees. 40 men, give or take, all of them hardened by years of border warfare. When Bill arrived, Archie Clement was the first to notice the whiskey stain on Bill's coat. "What happened?" little Archie asked, his hand already moving toward his pistol. Bill dismounted, handed his reins to Jim Anderson, and walked to the fire without speaking. The men gathered around, sensing something had shifted. Bill's silence was more dangerous than other men's shouting. Frank James studied Bill's face in the firelight. "We got the information on the supply convoy?" "No," Bill said flatly. "Plans changed." Jesse James, young and still learning when to speak and when to stay quiet, couldn't help himself. "What happened in town?" Bill looked at Jesse for a long moment, then pulled off his damp coat and threw it on the ground. "Union private spilled whiskey on me. Called us cowards. Said we hide in the woods because we're too scared to fight like real soldiers." The camp went quiet. Every man there knew what that meant. "Just one drunk soldier?" Frank asked carefully. "That worth changing plans over?" Bill's eyes went cold. "It ain't about the whiskey, Frank. It's about respect. That boy thinks we're nothing. His commanding officer thinks we're nothing. Time to teach them different." Archie Clement grinned, that terrible smile he got before violence. "I'm listening." Over the next 3 days, Bill's guerrillas became ghosts, slipping in and out of town gathering information. They talked to sympathetic locals, watched the garrison, learned the rhythms of Union patrols, and what they learned made Bill's decision easier. Lieutenant Samuel Cross wasn't just cruel, he was corrupt. He'd been skimming supplies from convoys, selling them to profiteers and pocketing the money. He taxed locals illegally, took bribes to look the other way on smuggling, and ran the garrison like his personal kingdom. His soldiers followed his example, emboldened by his protection. But it was the hangings that made Bill's blood run cold. A local farmer named Thomas Whitfield told the story, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. Bill met him at an abandoned barn on the 3rd night, listening as Whitfield described what Cross had done to his brother. "Daniel was 42 years old," Whitfield said, his weathered hands clenched into fists. Had a wife, 3 grown daughters, farmed his land, minded his business. Cross came to his farm asking about bushwhackers, where they camped, who supplied them, all that. Daniel didn't know nothing, told Cross as much. Whitfield's voice cracked. Cross said Daniel was lying, said all Missouri farmers were rebel sympathizers. Had his men dragged Daniel into town, put a rope around his neck right there in the main street, made folks watch while they hanged him. Daniel's wife Sarah tried to stop them, begged Cross for mercy. You know what Cross did? Bill waited. He laughed, told Sarah that's what happens to rebel trash, that she should be grateful he didn't burn their farm too. Then he made her watch her husband die. Bill's jaw tightened. Where's Sarah now? Still at the farm, trying to survive. Cross sends soldiers by every week to remind her what happens to people who don't cooperate. Whitfield looked at Bill with desperate hope. I heard you were in the area. I heard what you do to men like Cross. That's why I asked to meet you. Bill stood, his shadow long in the lamplight. Your brother, he was a good man, best man I ever knew. And Cross hanged him just for not having information? That's right. Bill nodded slowly. Cross made 12 executions in 2 months. Your brother was number 7. I checked. Every one of them was innocent. Just farmers, shopkeepers, one old preacher who spoke against the war. Not a single actual bushwhacker in the bunch. Whitfield's face hardened. You gonna do something about it? Yeah, Bill said quietly. I am. Back at camp, Bill called his lieutenants together. Frank and Jesse James, Archie Clement, Jim Anderson, Dave Poole, and 3 others. They gathered around a crude map of the area scratched in the dirt. Cross is dirty, Bill said without preamble. Corrupt, cruel, and sloppy. He's hanged innocent people, terrorized families, and thinks he's untouchable because of those garrison walls. So we hit the garrison? Archie asked eagerly. No, too fortified. Too many civilians could get caught in crossfire. Bill traced a line on the map. We draw him out. Make him come to us. Frank leaned forward. How? Cross wants bushwhackers. We'll give him bushwhackers, or the promise of them. We plant information that guerrillas are hiding at the old Bartlett Mill, 5 miles west. Cross won't be able to resist. He'll take a patrol, try to make another example. Jesse frowned. And when he gets there? Bill's smile was cold. We'll be waiting. 40 of us in the woods around that mill. He'll ride into a box canyon with no way out. Dave Poole, silent until now, spoke up. You want prisoners? 2. Cross and that private who called us cowards. The rest can die or run, I don't care. But those 2 are mine. Frank James shifted uncomfortably. Bill, we came here for the supply convoy. This is personal revenge for an insult and some hangings. Is it worth changing the whole mission? Bill looked at Frank with those cold eyes. That boy called us cowards in front of Union soldiers and townspeople. Cross has hanged 12 innocent Missouri people without trial. We let that stand. We proved them right. We are cowards, hiding in the woods, too scared to make them pay. He stood up. This ain't about revenge, Frank. This is about making sure every Union soldier in Missouri understands what happens when they underestimate bushwhackers. Jesse spoke up, his young voice uncertain. But the supply convoy? We'll still be there next week. Bill cut him off. This can't wait. Every day Cross stays alive, he hangs more people. Every day that private walks around bragging about disrespecting a rebel, more Union soldiers think we're weak. He looked around at his men. We do this right. It sends a message from here to Kansas City. It tells Union forces that Missouri belongs to us, not them. Archie Clement was already checking his pistols. When do we set the trap? Tomorrow. We get word to Cross through a sympathizer. Tell him bushwhackers are holed up at the mill. He'll take the bait. He's too arrogant not to. Jim Anderson, Bill's brother, nodded. What about McAllister? The private who spilled the whiskey? Bill's voice went flat. He rides with Cross everywhere. Learned his cruelty from his lieutenant. They'll both be at that mill. Frank James tried one more time. Bill, listen to me. This is going to escalate things. We kill a Union lieutenant and his men. They'll send more troops, burn more farms in retaliation. Is teaching them a lesson worth what comes after? Bill looked at Frank for a long moment. You remember what happened to my sisters, Frank? How the Union prison collapsed and killed them. How the authorities said it was an accident, refused to investigate. His voice was quiet but carried weight like iron. I've been teaching Union forces lessons ever since. Every time I think, maybe I've made my point, they do something like hang innocent farmers or insult bushwhackers in public. So yeah, Frank, it's worth it, because the only language they understand is blood. The guerrillas spent that night preparing. They cleaned weapons, checked ammunition, sharpened knives. Bill sat apart from the others, staring into the fire, thinking about Thomas Whitfield's brother, hanging in the town square while his wife begged for mercy, thinking about Lieutenant Cross laughing while innocent people died, thinking about Private McAllister's words. cowards hiding in the woods. By dawn, the trap was set. A local farmer, sympathetic to the Confederate cause, rode into town and reported to the garrison that he'd seen bushwhackers at the old Bartlett mill. Lieutenant Cross took the bait exactly as Bill predicted. 20 men, Cross ordered, buckling on his gun belt. We'll surround the mill, burn them out, maybe hang a few as examples. He looked at Private McAllister. You're coming with me, Corporal. Time to show you how we handle rebel trash. McAllister, still nursing a hangover from 3 nights ago, nodded eagerly. He'd been bragging about shoving that rebel in the saloon, how he'd put the man in his place. He had no idea that rebel was Bloody Bill Anderson. Had no idea he'd just volunteered for his own execution. The Union patrol rode out at sunrise, 20 soldiers in blue uniforms, rifles ready, confident they were hunting cowards who'd run at the first shot. They had no idea the cowards were hunting them. The Bartlett mill sat in a shallow valley surrounded by wooded hills, a perfect killing ground for anyone who knew how to use terrain. The mill itself had been abandoned for 2 years, its water wheel broken and still, the building's roof half collapsed. A creek ran nearby, the water low from autumn drought, exposing smooth stones that would make crossing easy. Bill Anderson had chosen the location 3 days ago, recognizing it immediately as the kind of place Union soldiers would approach with confidence and die with surprise. His 40 guerrillas moved into position before dawn, spreading through the hills in a loose semicircle that surrounded the mill on 3 sides. The 4th side, the approach from town, was left open, an invitation that looked like carelessness, but was calculated precision. Frank James positioned 10 men on the eastern ridge, hidden behind oak trees and fallen logs. Jesse took another 10 to the west, younger fighters eager to prove themselves. Archie Clement commanded the center with 15 men, the heaviest concentration of firepower. Bill himself stayed mobile with 5 riders, ready to plug gaps or exploit opportunities. The remaining guerrillas held the horses a mile back, ready to mount up for pursuit or retreat depending on how things unfolded. Wait for my signal, Bill told his men as the sun crept over the horizon. Let them get close to the mill. Let them think they've got us trapped. When I fire the first shot, you open up, but aim careful. I want Cross and McAllister alive. The rest can die. Archie Clement checked his revolvers, 4 of them, each loaded and ready. What if they surrender? They won't, Bill said flatly. Men like Cross don't surrender. They run or fight, but they don't quit until they got no choice. The morning stretched long and tense. Guerrillas stayed hidden, barely moving, watching the road from town through gaps in the foliage. The sun climbed higher, warming the air, making the wait harder. Some men dozed, others prayed. Bill just watched, patient as death itself. Around 10 o'clock, dust rose on the road from town. Here they come, Frank James whispered, lowering his spyglass. 20 riders, 2 wagons. Cross is leading. I can see his lieutenant bars. McAllister's riding next to him. Bill felt something cold settle in his chest, that familiar feeling before violence. Not excitement, not fear, just a cold certainty that what was coming was necessary and right. The Union patrol approached the mill cautiously at first. Cross held up his hand, stopping his men at the edge of the clearing. He studied the abandoned building, the quiet woods, looking for signs of ambush. Spread out, Cross ordered. 10 men circle left, 10 circle right. Anyone tries to run from that mill, shoot them. If they're inside, we burn it. The soldiers split into 2 groups, moving around the mill in opposite directions. They were good troops, careful, keeping low, rifles ready. But they were looking at the mill, not the hills around it. Bill watched them move into position, his finger resting on his rifle trigger. Cross and McAllister had dismounted, standing near their horses, watching their men work. Cross was talking, probably giving orders, confident in his authority. The Union soldiers reached the mill doors. One of them kicked it open, rifle aimed inside. "Empty!" he shouted. "Nobody here!" Cross swore loudly. "Search it anyway. Check for supplies, weapons, anything that proves bushwhackers were here." That's when Bill fired. His shot took the soldier at the mill door in the shoulder, spinning him around. Before the man hit the ground, 40 guerrilla rifles opened up from 3 sides simultaneously. The valley erupted in gunfire, muzzle flashes sparking from the hills, smoke rolling down into the clearing. Union soldiers went down in the first volley. 5 dead, 3 wounded, the rest scrambling for cover that didn't exist. They tried to form a defensive line, but they were in the open, exposed, surrounded by enemies they couldn't see clearly. "Ambush!" Cross screamed, diving behind his horse. Fall back to the road!" But there was no falling back. Frank James's men cut off the eastern retreat. Jesse's fighters blocked the west. The Union soldiers were trapped in a box with nowhere to go except down. One brave soldier tried to charge the eastern ridge, firing his rifle as he ran. 3 guerrilla bullets caught him before he made it 10 yards. Another soldier threw down his weapon and raised his hands. A guerrilla shot him anyway. On the Missouri border, surrender was a luxury few could afford. McAllister was frozen in terror, crouched behind a water trough, his rifle unfired. He'd never been in a real fight before, never experienced the chaos and horror of men dying around him. His promotion had been political, a reward for being Cross's favorite, not for any actual combat experience. Cross, to his credit, kept firing. He'd pulled his revolver and was shooting at muzzle flashes in the hills, hitting nothing but wasting ammunition with desperate determination. "Fight, damn you!" he screamed at his men. "They're just rebels! Fight!" But his men were dying. In 3 minutes of sustained fire, the Union patrol was reduced to 6 living soldiers, 4 wounded, and 2 still fighting. The guerrillas had suffered no casualties. They had cover, elevation, and overwhelming firepower. Bill raised his hand, and the shooting stopped. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by moans from wounded soldiers and the ringing echo of gunfire fading into the hills. "Lieutenant Cross," Bill called out, his voice carrying across the clearing. "Your men are dead or dying. You're surrounded. Put down your weapon." Cross, blood running from a cut on his forehead where a wood splinter had grazed him, looked around at the carnage. Bodies in blue uniforms lay scattered in the dirt. His surviving soldiers were either wounded or had thrown down their weapons. "Who are you?" Cross shouted back, though Bill suspected he already knew. Bill stepped out from the tree line, rifle in one hand, his hat pushed back so Cross could see his face clearly. Behind him, guerrillas emerged from the woods. 20, 30, 40 men, all armed, all watching. "Name's Anderson," Bill said quietly. "Bloody Bill Anderson. You might have heard of me." Cross's face went pale. Even from 40 yards away, Bill could see the recognition, the sudden understanding of how badly he'd miscalculated. "Oh, God," Cross whispered. McAllister was still hiding behind the water trough, shaking so hard his teeth rattled. He'd heard stories about Bloody Bill Anderson. Everyone had. Stories about guerrillas who took no prisoners, who scalped Union soldiers, who killed with a cruelty that made even Confederate regulars uncomfortable. Archie Clement and Dave Poole moved into the clearing, revolvers drawn, approaching the surviving Union soldiers. "Drop your weapons," Archie barked. "Do it now or die where you stand." The 6 living soldiers, 3 of them wounded, threw down their rifles and raised their hands. They were young men, most of them conscripts from eastern states who'd expected garrison duty to be safe. Cross raised his revolver one more time, aiming at Bill with a hand that shook from shock and fear. "You're a murderer, Anderson. A terrorist. You'll hang for this." Bill didn't even flinch. "Maybe so. But you first." Dave Poole shot the revolver out of Cross's hand, the bullet smashing metal and knuckles. Cross screamed, clutching his mangled fingers, falling to his knees. Guerrillas surrounded McAllister, dragging him from behind the water trough. He didn't resist, couldn't resist. He was paralyzed with terror. They threw him down next to Cross, binding both men's hands behind their backs with rough rope. Bill walked across the clearing, his boots crunching on spent shell casings. He looked down at Cross, who was still clutching his ruined hand, blood dripping between his fingers. "You hanged 12 innocent people," Bill said conversationally. "Farmers, shopkeepers, a preacher. Not a single one of them was a bushwhacker. You hanged them because you could, because you liked the power." Cross spat blood. "They were rebel sympathizers. They deserved—" Bill kicked him in the ribs, hard enough to cut off the words. Cross fell sideways, gasping. "They were innocent," Bill said again, his voice never rising. "And you're gonna pay for every single one." McAllister was crying now, tears streaming down his face. "Please," he sobbed. "I didn't do nothing. I was just drunk. I didn't mean—" Bill turned to look at him, those cold, dark eyes focused like rifle sights. "You called us cowards. Said we hide in the woods because we're too scared to fight like real soldiers." He gestured at the bodies scattered around the clearing. "This looked like cowardice to you?" McAllister couldn't speak, could only shake his head frantically. Frank James approached Bill, keeping his voice low. "What now? We've got them. We could just execute them quick and ride out." "No," Bill said flatly. "Quick ain't the lesson. These men made examples of our people, hanged them in public, made folks watch, used fear to control. Now they get to be the example." Archie Clement was already smiling that terrible smile. "What do you want done?" Bill looked at the 6 surviving Union soldiers, all of them on their knees, hands bound. "You 6, you're gonna ride back to your garrison with a message, but first you're gonna watch what happens to men who underestimate bushwhackers." One of the soldiers, barely 18 years old, started to cry. Another one vomited from fear. Cross tried one more time to salvage his authority. "This is murder. You'll be hunted for this. The Union Army will—" "The Union Army don't scare me," Bill interrupted. "You know why? Because the Union Army didn't come for my sisters when they died in that prison. The Union Army didn't stop Jayhawkers from burning Missouri farms. The Union Army sent men like you to terrorize innocent people." He crouched down so he was eye level with Cross. "You thought you were untouchable. You thought wrong." Bill stood and nodded to Archie. "String up Cross first. Use the mill's beam. Same way he hanged those farmers. Let him feel what they felt." Cross's eyes went wide. "No, no, please. I'll leave Missouri. I'll resign my commission. Guerrillas dragged him toward the mill, his boots scraping in the dirt, his screaming echoing off the hills. McAllister watched in horror, understanding that what happened to Cross was coming for him next. Bill approached McAllister, crouching down beside the terrified young soldier. "You spilled whiskey on my coat 3 days ago, called me rebel trash, said I was a coward hiding in the woods." McAllister was hyperventilating, unable to form words. "I let you live that night because I had other plans," Bill continued quietly. "But I didn't forget. On the Missouri border, disrespect costs, and you're about to pay full price." Inside the mill, Cross was still screaming. "Contagem de palavras. 1780 palavras aguardando OK para prosseguir com bloco 4. They strung Lieutenant Cross up on the same type of rope he'd used on Thomas Whitfield and the 11 others. Rough hemp that bit into skin, the kind that didn't break necks clean but let men strangle slow. Archie Clement threw the rope over a thick beam inside the mill, Guerrillas holding Cross upright while he struggled and screamed. "Please," Cross begged, all his authority gone, reduced to raw animal fear. "I have money. I can pay you. I can get you supplies, weapons, anything you want." Bill watched without expression. "You made Daniel Whitfield's wife watch her husband die. You laughed while you did it. Told her that's what happens to rebel trash." "I was following orders. The Union command said, 'You hang 12 innocent people.'" Bill cut him off. "That wasn't orders. That was you, enjoying the power, enjoying the fear. You're gonna die the same way they did." Cross's legs gave out. The guerrillas holding him let go, and suddenly his full weight hung from the rope. His feet kicked frantically 6 inches off the ground, searching for purchase that didn't exist. His face turned red, then purple, eyes bulging, tongue protruding as he fought for air that wouldn't come. The 6 surviving Union soldiers watched in horror, forced to witness what was happening. One of them turned away. Dave Poole grabbed his head and forced him to look. "You watch," Poole said coldly. "You remember. You tell everyone what you saw here." Cross's struggles slowed. His kicks became weaker, more desperate. Urine darkened his pants as his body lost control. The terrible sounds he made, half gurgle, half wheeze, were the same sounds the farmers and shopkeepers had made when Cross hanged them. It took 4 minutes for Cross to die. 4 long minutes of choking and kicking and dying by inches. When his body finally went still, Bill nodded to Archie, who cut the rope. Cross's corpse fell in a heap, neck twisted at an unnatural angle, face frozen in terror and agony. "That's one," Bill said quietly. Then he turned to McAllister. The young private was shaking so violently he could barely stay upright. He'd vomited twice watching Cross die, and now he was crying openly, snot and tears mixing on his face. "Please," McAllister sobbed. "I'm sorry. I didn't know who you were. I was drunk. I didn't mean nothing by it." Bill crouched down in front of him. "You called us cowards. Said we hide in the woods because we're too scared to fight like real men. You shoved me, spilled whiskey on my coat, humiliated me in front of Union soldiers and townspeople. I was stupid. I was drunk. Please, I'll do anything." "You learned your cruelty from Cross," Bill continued, ignoring the pleas. "Rode with him on raids, watched him terrorize families, probably helped him burn farms and hang innocents. You thought you were untouchable because you wore a Union uniform." McAllister was hyperventilating now, words tumbling out in desperate panic. "I never killed nobody, I swear. I was just following Cross. I didn't have a choice." Bill stood up, looking down at the pathetic figure. "You had a choice in that saloon. Could have walked past my table. Could have apologized when you spilled the whiskey. Could have shown some respect." He paused. "But you chose to insult, to push, to humiliate. On the Missouri border, those choices have consequences." He nodded to Jim Anderson and Dave Poole. They dragged McAllister to his feet, half carrying him toward the mill where Cross's body still lay. "No, no, please. I'm 20 years old. I got a mother in Ohio. She's waiting for me to come home." Bill's jaw tightened at the mention of a mother. For a moment, something flickered in his cold eyes. Maybe memory of his own mother, maybe his dead sister's. But then it was gone, replaced by that frozen rage. Thomas Whitfield had a wife, Bill said. The preacher cross-hanged had a congregation. Every person your lieutenant killed had people waiting for them to come home. You rode with Cross. You enabled him. You're as guilty as he was. They put the rope around McAllister's neck. The young soldier's legs gave out completely. They had to hold him upright. He was babbling now, incoherent with terror, words running together into meaningless noise. "String him up," Bill ordered. McAllister's death was faster than Cross's. The guerrillas jerked the rope hard, snapping his neck in the first few seconds. Maybe it was mercy. Maybe it was just efficiency. Either way, McAllister stopped kicking after 30 seconds, his body swaying gently in the dusty air inside the mill. Bill turned to the 6 surviving Union soldiers. They were white as ghosts, several of them crying, all of them understanding how close they'd come to sharing Cross and McAllister's fate. "You're going to ride back to Independence," Bill told them. "You're going to tell your garrison commander exactly what happened here. Tell him Lieutenant Cross and Corporal McAllister are dead. Tell him Bloody Bill Anderson killed them for crimes against Missouri citizens. Tell him we hanged them the same way Cross hanged innocent people." One of the soldiers found his voice, barely a whisper. What do we tell them about you?" Bill's smile was cold as December ice. "Tell them we ain't cowards. Tell them bushwhackers don't hide in the woods. We hunt in them. Tell them every Union officer who terrorizes civilians, who abuses authority, who thinks his rank makes him untouchable. Tell them we're coming for them too." He paused, looking at each soldier in turn. "And tell them next time, we burn the garrison. This was mercy. This was a lesson. Next time will be war." The guerrillas untied the soldiers' hands and gave them back their horses, but not their weapons. The 6 men mounted up, hands shaking on the reins, and rode away at a gallop. They didn't look back. They never would. Frank James approached Bill as the dust from the fleeing soldiers settled. "That's gonna bring hell down on Missouri. You know that, right?" "Hell's already here," Bill replied, watching the bodies of Cross and McAllister sway in the breeze. "Has been since Kansas Jayhawkers started burning farms. Since Union authorities let my sisters die. Since men like Cross started hanging innocents." He turned to Frank. "All I did was make sure they understand we can reach them. That authority don't protect them. That cruelty has a cost." Jesse James, who'd been quiet since the executions, finally spoke. "Was it justice or revenge?" Bill thought about that for a moment. "Revenge is hot, burns you inside. Justice is cold, but lasts forever." He looked at the mill, at the 2 bodies hanging there. This was cold. This was calculated. This was justice. The guerrillas burned the bodies before they left. Wouldn't do to leave them hanging for scavengers. They scattered the ashes, took the horses, and disappeared back into the Missouri woods like smoke dissipating in wind. News of the ambush spread through Union ranks faster than wildfire. The garrison at Independence sent urgent telegrams requesting reinforcements. Soldiers became paranoid, seeing Bloody Bill Anderson in every shadow, questioning every quiet stranger. The incident demoralized Union forces across western Missouri while energizing Confederate guerrillas who saw it as proof that resistance still mattered. Private McAllister's mother in Ohio received a letter from the Army. "Killed in action against Confederate guerrillas." Nothing about the whiskey or the insult or the 4 minutes of choking. Just killed in action, as if that explained anything. Thomas Whitfield heard about Cross's death and wept, not from joy but from the knowledge that his brother's suffering had been avenged. Sarah Whitfield, Daniel's widow, felt something ease in her chest for the first time since watching her husband hang. It wasn't happiness. You don't get happiness back after losing someone you love, but it was something. Maybe peace. Maybe just knowing that evil had consequences. The story became legend on the Missouri border. Union soldiers learned to watch their words, to never assume a quiet man in a pulled low hat was harmless. "Never insult a stranger on the border," old-timers would say for years afterward. "Might be you're talking to Bloody Bill Anderson." For Bill, it was another debt collected, another message sent. He didn't ride for glory or recognition. He rode to ensure Union forces feared bushwhackers as much as bushwhackers feared Union atrocities. The war would claim thousands more lives before ending. Bill himself would die young, ambushed near Albany in October, shot so many times his body was barely recognizable. But stories like this ensured his legend outlived him. Decades later, people still argued about whether Bloody Bill Anderson was a freedom fighter or a terrorist, whether his violence was justified or just more cruelty in a cruel time. The truth was probably both. The Missouri-Kansas border war had no heroes, only survivors, and those who didn't survive. Men like Cross and McAllister paid the price for underestimating their enemy, for believing authority made them invincible. And men like Bill Anderson paid a different price. The cost of violence on their souls, the weight of all those deaths, the knowledge that justice and revenge sometimes looked exactly the same. Well, there you have it, folks. Subscribe if you haven't already. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what do you think about what Anderson did? Was it justice or murder? Let's hear it.